Conspiracy Unlimited with Richard Serrett.
On this episode, world explorer and author Brad Olsen prepares for the trip of his life to the Antarctic in hopes of catching a glimpse of an ancient alien craft emerging from the melting ice.
Really, the focus is going to be to try to get to this 3-mile-long craft that's exposed in the ice. All of these elite have been going down there in the last 4 or 5 years. John Kerry on election day, that's a curious time to go. You've got Patriarch Krill, even rumors that Obama himself escaped away when he did a trip to Argentina a few years ago. And then you got like Prince Harry and his army buddies cross-country skiing out to see it.
Hey, welcome to your Monday. Author-explorer Brad Olsen is standing by. He's had a busy summer exploring some sacred places up in Georgian Bay here in Canada, Manitoulin Island, for example. He'll tell us about an amazing place up in Tobermory, which is a graveyard for sunken ships. And then he'll tell us about a trip he's preparing to take this fall down to South America to visit the Paracas skulls of Peru. And finally, if he gets all his ducks in a row, a trip to the Antarctic in hopes of seeing this supposed 3-mile-long ancient alien craft that numerous dignitaries have been flying down there to see. Before that, a quick hello to a few faithful podcast listeners. David Bard from Flint, Michigan writes, I hope you had a safe travel on your way back from Greece. I found you through Jim Harold's Paranormal podcast over a year ago. I'm a mechanic and I listen to Conspiracy Unlimited and the Rock and Roll Twilight Zone through Apple Podcasts while I'm wrenching on vehicles. I like how you always ask your guests the right questions. Keep digging and I'll keep listening. Thanks again for all you give us. Well, thank you, David. Nathan is listening in Phoenix, Arizona on his Pixel 2 Android. Hey, Nathan, thank you. Dennis Hudson, a musician also from Michigan, writes, I listen to your shows on Apple Podcasts, and I'll say it gets me through bland, sluggish days and inspires me majorly. You rock, man. Keep it up. My love and prayers to you and the family. Thank you. Warm regards. Again, that's Dennis Hudson in Michigan, a.k.a. Olms. Well, I must say it is great to be back home. I love to get away, but coming home is always so sweet. I'll tell you someone who really loves to travel and explore, especially to places off the beaten path. Brad Olsen is the author of 9 books, including 2 in his Esoteric Series, Modern Esoteric and Future Esoteric. He's an award-winning author, book publisher, and event producer. His keynote presentations and interviews have enlightened audiences at Contact in the Desert, Awareness Life Expo, the 5D events, and dozens of radio, including Coast to Coast, Ground Zero, and Fade to Black, and television shows, including Ancient Aliens, America Unearthed, and Mysteries of the Outdoors. In August 2017, Brad started hosting his own syndicated radio show called the Esoteric Circle. He's the founder and co-producer of the How Weird Street Fair in the Soma neighborhood of his home base, San Francisco. The Chicago native's esoteric writing continues to reach a wide audience while he continues breaking ground in alternative journalism, public speaking, illustration, and photography. He's also the author of Sacred Places, North America. Brad Olsen, welcome to Conspiracy Unlimited. How are you?
Hey, Richard, I'm doing great. Nice to hear your voice again.
Well, it sounds like you were investigating, sort of poking around in, not sort of my backyard, up in northern Ontario, Lake Huron, Manitoulin Island. What took you up there?
Well, my girlfriend Emily lives in Detroit, and we were at a family reunion of hers in Traverse City. And I told her, hey, we got a couple days. Let me show you some places that I discovered when I was working on my book called Sacred Places North America. And she was game for it. And I took her out there, and she was very happy I did. And we spent a couple nights. We camped on Manitoulin Island and then took the ferry over to the Bruce Peninsula. A couple nights up there and checked out that beautiful area of northern Lake Huron, Georgian Bay. It's just so beautiful in the summertime, really probably all year round, but easy to travel and easy to camp in the summer.
Right. When I was a kid, we were a camping family. My dad built a tent trailer. We hauled it behind our 66 Ford Meteor, and I swear we did every provincial park up that way, mainly around sort of north of Superior, Lake Superior. So I spent a lot of time up there. It's been a long time since I've been up there. But what sacred sites are featured in your book having to do with, let's say, Manitoulin Island?
Well, there's a spot called Dreamer's Rock, which is just beautiful beyond measure. And the reason is, as you know, the Midwest is somewhat flat, but in northern Lake Huron, you have the Niagara Escarpment that comes through the Bruce Peninsula, but you also have the Canadian Shield north of Lake Superior and Lake Huron. And that's a pretty high escarpment for the Midwest. And on the northern side, where glacial action took place, you have incredibly sculpted rock formations and hillsides, and even a few ski resorts in northern Michigan. And the landscape is just so dramatic with the way the rock and land formations come down into the lake. And it's not actually on Manitoulin Island. It's called Birch Island, just before you cross a small bridge to get to Manitoulin Island. It's on a Native American, as you say, First Nation Indian reservation. And you do need to get permission to go, which I did, and paid a nominal fee. And then they'll give you a map of the area of Birch Island. And on the map, you can see that around Dreamer's Rock has always been a very sacred native place. And in fact, when you pull in there, you come in to an area where you leave your car that's a ritual area where they do drum circles and ceremony and sweat lodge. And then rising above all of that, overlooking Lake Huron and all the beautiful little islands and coves, is Dreamer's Rock. And this has always been a sacred native place used for vision quest. So we did our hike up there, and when we got to Dreamer's Rock, it's glacially polished, meaning it's white quartzite crystal, but polished by the glacier. So it just gleams in the sunshine and just twinkles with sunlight dancing off of the rock. When we got up there, there were prayer flags and other mementos of the Native American people. And the view is just so phenomenal. You can just see for miles and miles over Manitoulin Island, the Bay of Islands that we had just come through, and so much beautiful landscape around Georgian Bay and Lake Huron that Emily was very impressed. And I think I made a believer out of her, Richard, that visiting these sacred places is truly a worthwhile endeavor.
Oh, for sure. Now, what actually happens on a dream quest? How did they get themselves into sort of that state of being? Did they starve themselves? How was that accomplished?
Great question. Yeah, this was pretty typical of all Native American people throughout North America, not just the Ojibwe and the tribes that lived around Lake Huron, but it was basically to test a young adolescence. And yes, there was the matter of starving or foraging for food, because oftentimes a vision quest would take several days. And as I found when I was researching the book Sacred Places North America, that there were these landforms all across the continent that were very significant, sort of the way I described Dreamer's Rock, that you could just tell there's a presence about them. And that's where they would send the young adolescents when they're probably around the time of puberty, and would send them out there and say, you have to fast and chant and meditate at this location until you have a vision, till you have a dream that tells you, or you see visually, who your keeper will be, who your animal token is going to identify with. And oftentimes they would go out on this trip and maybe not even know what it was that they saw or what was really significant, because after a few days when they went on this vision quest, they would come back, and the first thing is the elders would convene with the adolescent and go through all the circumstances of that vision quests, and then they would often find that there was a certain animal that would reappear, or a dream that the child had. And indeed, the name that that child would have for the rest of their adult life would come out of that vision quest. So it's a real beautiful coming of age story that unfortunately we in this modern world don't seem to do anymore, or really to value. But for the Native American people, this was one of the biggest moments of their life, going to these vision quest sites.
That's so true. We do not have coming-of-age rituals. I mean, obviously in Judaism they have bar mitzvahs, but there is no. I mean, you get your beginner's driver's permit. That's about it in Western culture. It's tragic, really. I think in many ways. Have you ever been on a dream quest, a vision quest?
Of my own, I never had any elders to take some of my stories back to, but I've gone to many of these places, and I've felt the presence, even just the very subtle presence of the way the sunlight comes down, as I mentioned, the way it twinkles off the rock, to the fish swimming in the bay that Emily and I went for a swim beforehand, because it was a very hot day too, to little things like an anthill that you might notice, or the way that they set up the prayer flags on top of the mountain. Now, this isn't really my culture, Richard, so I can't really take credit for any of it. But what I do like to do is just to immerse myself in some of these locations, and just think about what's coming into my head. And sometimes you do get some of these thoughts of animal tokens, or you see a beautiful bird flying off in the distance, and it just seems things are much more accentuated when you're at these places, and when you just open yourself up to the possibility that maybe there is a message that you can gain from being at these sites and just taking a few moments and being quiet.
Is it the Ojibwe up there in Manitoulin? Are they the sort of the predominant First Nation that lives there?
Yeah, that's correct. There's subsets of the Ojibwe, because they did expand largely across most of the Great Lakes region, and we're very a maritime culture. You mentioned going to Lake Superior as a youngster. Well, there's Agua Bay on Lake Superior too, where they have pictograph
yes.
of a sea monster escorting a group of Native Americans across the lake.
Yes, I have seen that. I remember that now. That's a place that we visited. I was going to ask you about the pictographs or petroglyphs. What's the proper term?
Well, the difference is petroglyphs are what's chipped into the rock itself, where pictographs are actually painted. And this was a pictograph. It was a painted image of this sea monster and natives in a canoe sailing across. And there's two ways to interpret this particular pictograph: that maybe the monster is chasing them and is an adversary. But others told me that no, it was actually an escort, and it was actually friended the natives and would help it come across Lake Superior. And as we know, Lake Superior can be quite the tempest. And that was where the Edmund Fitzgerald went down in the famous song by Gordon Lightfoot.
Gitchagumi, Lake Gitchagumi. Now, you and I, the first time you and I met was actually in Chaco Canyon. We were both working on an episode of, I think, National Park Mysteries, I think was the name of the show. And I heard stories about skinwalkers in Chaco Canyon. I was actually told, don't go down a certain highway around Albuquerque because, you're looking for trouble, and they talked about skinwalkers. Is there an equivalent of that legend among, let's say, the Ojibwe or First Nations that inhabited or inhabit the Great Lakes, Lake Huron, Lake Superior? Do we have skinwalkers up here?
Well, there are aspects of skinwalkers everywhere. I think they're just called different names. But throughout Native American First Nation mythology, you always have your good deities and your bad deities, how they take form and what they represent spiritually is kind of unique to each tribe. But certainly, for example, this sea monster in Lake Superior could have been similar to a skinwalker that we have heard about in Chaco Canyon or Utah or other locations that are this area of good and bad spirits, but most commonly bad spirits, that the Native Americans would typically just avoid those locations. But in a way, that's kind of what gives these locations a little bit more aura. Even if it is bad juju to them, it's still saying something about the location, that it has a high spiritual value, even if it is one that could be dangerous to the Native American people themselves.
So much paranormal activity. For example, I recently interviewed someone down in southwestern Pennsylvania, which just seems to be like this incredibly active location, a lot of paranormal activity. And it seems to be connected to disturbing Indian burial mounds. Manitoulin Island, I mean, is there a lot of paranormal activity there that you're aware of?
Not really so much paranormal that I'm aware of, but certainly this Dreamer's Rock is well known by all the Native American as well as the civilian population in the area. So, for example, we drove in to Manitoulin Island. The first little town you get to when you cross the bridge is called Little Current. And indeed, there is more than a little current. You could see it flowing right under the bridge. We went to a restaurant. I just needed to recap my directions to get out there, and I asked the post office person where Dreamer's Rock is, and there were a couple Native Americans waiting in line, and just like everybody jumped up to tell me where it was, and even when we were walking out the door, telling me how important it was. And so they truly do value these locations in this modern age, and I'm very glad that they do. And they have built a new Native American center on Birch Island, just a few miles down the road from Dreamer's Rock. And the Native American people there really do take a lot of pride in their culture and heritage, and I think we're genuinely glad to see someone like myself show up and show an interest and want to go out there and learn more about it.
You also discovered or learned about shipwrecks, a ship burial ground, a ship graveyard, really. Tell me about that.
Oh, that's really fascinating, and that's one I didn't see coming. I met my good friend Mike Boyd, who got a campsite for us right there on the northern tip of the Bruce Peninsula, and he met us when we got off the ferry. And we were meant to go to the Fern Grotto, which I understand is very beautiful, and it's the deepest drop-off in Lake Huron. I think it was 474 feet, pretty much straight down. And you need a reservation, especially in the heat of the summer. And we did have one, but we missed the first ferry just by 5 minutes. So the later ferry kind of skewed our schedule. So we didn't get to go to the Fern Grotto. But then the next day we decided to take a boat out to Flower Pot Island, which is, again, another state national park in Canada. And you pay a nominal fee, and we got on the boat, and when the boat was going out there, I saw some snorkelers walking by. I said, well, where are you going? Oh, there's a whole bunch of shipwrecks here. Really? That you can snorkel to or scuba dive. The water is just so clear, Richard, in the summer. I really felt like I was in Greece or some tropical location, and just looking down and seeing the abyss, just deep, deep blue, and all these levels going down. I really wish I had more time to go snorkeling or diving.
Right.
So we're taking the boat out.
This is Tobermory.
Tobermory.
I think there's like something like 20 shipwrecks. I've never been. It's on my to-do list, but I have friends who they're just blown away by it.
And they do glass bottom boat tours, but we were in a bit of a hurry that day, so we just took a regular boat to go out to Flower Pot Island, and they took us on a tour in this bay where two wooden boats were at the bottom of this shallow bay. and you could look over the side and see down into them perfectly. We didn't really feel like we needed a glass bottom boat, but the water is so cold and preserves this wood. These ships went down in the 19th century and are still in great condition. Wish I could have gone down there and scuba dived or snorkel. In fact, when we were pulling out the boat, I see a guy in a wetsuit and just snorkeling out. And I asked the tour guide, I'm the kind of guy who likes to Q&A with the tour guide, and I said, well, how do you go diving out there to those wrecks? And he goes, oh, you got to get on a boat and take a tour. I go, well, what about that guy? He goes, yeah, I guess you could do that too. Just swim out to him and hold your breath and swim down into him. If you're a good swimmer. So really fascinating. And Richard, I guess the point of all this is the water clarity up there is so clear that you can see over 100 feet. And as a scuba diver, visibility is everything. When you've got good visibility, a dive can be really, really fascinating. And certainly Georgian Bay of Lake Huron fits that role of very clear, very high visibility water. And for any of your listeners who are snorkelers or scuba enthusiasts, consider this area up by Tobermory, which is the northern tip of the Bruce Peninsula. And I also found out that there's a very famous trail, a hiking trail that goes through this part of Ontario, Canada. In fact, it's even called the Bruce Trail. And it follows the Niagara Escarpment, which is like a cliff line that goes all the way to Niagara Falls. And that's where the trail begins and ends right there in Tobermory.
How much did you walk? Did you have a chance to walk some of it, hike it?
Just a little bit around where we were up at Tobermory. Unfortunately, again, time was more of a constraint, and our big free day was out at Flower Pot Island. But that is a great day trip, and my friend Mike Boyd, he knew that island like the back of his hand and took us to some caves that not many people know about. So that was really quite exciting to get off the beaten trail and see some of the features of this island that nobody really knew about.
Hey, this is Tony Merkel, host of The Confessionals, a blog talk radio podcast that brings...
As you're staring up at the night sky, ever wonder who's staring back? No, me either. But I guess you better say it because of Richard, he's all wrapped up in this stuff. Conspiracy Unlimited with Richard Serrett.
Brad Olsen, the author of Sacred Places North America, is here. What are you up to these days? Because you're always traveling hither and yon, and are you working on another Sacred Sites book?
Well, I might. I'm going down to South America for 4 months in less than 2 months' time now, November 2nd all the way until the end of February with my girlfriend Emily, and we're looking to buy a camper van and drive around the whole of Argentina, going into Chile, going into Peru, Bolivia, Uruguay, Paraguay, maybe Brazil, but largely just doing Argentina all the way down to Terra del Fuego. And we're going to make a shot into Antarctica and maybe try to get permission to go see some of these anomalous features we've heard so much about going on down there. It's very technical. You need clearance and a pretty substantial budget, but should be putting up a crowdfunding site pretty soon to appeal for the funds to go to the, quote, Illuminati Disneyland, where there is supposed to be a 3-mile craft that is melting in the ice. Well, this is what people are talking about, so I'm going to go down there as an investigator.
There has to be some reason all these foreign dignitaries are flying down there. John Kerry, this is in the last couple of years, John Kerry went down there, the former Secretary of State. I believe it may have been the patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church went down there, yet people are being very hush-hush. So, that's going to be a tough nut for you to be able to get clearance to go down there.
It is a tough nut, but I'm working with Emery Smith, who is a insider who came out of some of these secret space program and black projects. And he is a military guy, and he knows some top-ranking people. So his job right now is to gain us clearance. My job right now is to get our technological equipment, because we're going to film this and maybe even do a live webcast over the website, peacetour.com. Easy URL to remember. And if we could find a satellite Wi-Fi phone that would work in the Altiplano of Peru and Bolivia to Antarctica, this could be very dynamic. It could be a follow along every day as we get closer and closer to getting down there. And then if Emory can make it happen and we can get the clearance and the funding to go out there and mount an expedition, it could be very well historic. So if you want, I can set up an interview with you from Antarctica, and let's take it live from down there. I bet you haven't had a guest reporting from Antarctica before, Richard.
I have not, and I would jump at the chance. So what does your gut tell you? Is this a joint, some people think it's a joint Nazi UFO base of some sort?
Well, of course, there is the New Schwabenland base that was set up in the 1930s by the Nazis. I'll tell you something really interesting, Richard. Just the other day, I'm scouring over Antarctica maps, and I just bought a big canvas map of the Nat Geo, like 3 feet by 2 feet, that can roll up and won't get crinkled because it's printed on canvas. And I started going over all the bases, and there are 29 countries that have bases in Antarctica, including Germany has 2 bases in New Schwabenland, where they set up their base in the 1930s and 40s. Of course, Antarctica is a continent. It's huge. And I'm not trying to kid myself to think that we're going to get there. We're going to go see these other sites. There's pyramids in the Shackleton mountain range. I mean, it would be wonderful to do the tour of all the sites, but really the focus is going to be to try to get to this 3-mile-long craft that's exposed in the ice. And you're absolutely right. All of these elite have been going down there in the last 4 or 5 years. You mentioned John Kerry on Election Day. That's a curious time to go. You've got Patriarch Kirill of the Orthodox, I believe it's Russian church.
You're right, yes.
Even rumors that Obama himself escaped away when he did a trip to Argentina a few years ago. And then you got like Prince Harry and his army buddies cross-country skiing out to see it. Now, a couple months ago, there was the Fitbit, which is an exercise app for the arm that you wear on your wrist that can give you all your biometric data. They had a big data dump a couple months ago. And most people were talking, oh, now the soldiers are going to be ambushed in Kandahar because Fitbit's telling them where they go jogging on their off time. That got the lion's share of attention, Richard. But what was really important was Antarctica. And you have all these people going out to this one location and doing a great big loop around something. Try to go see that on Google Earth. It's all whitewashed out. You won't find anything. But what were they doing down there? What were they doing? This big circle around something and then going back the same day. So there's a lot of mysteries down there. And all you got to do is look at some of the YouTube videos, show you like a big opening in the rock that you can fly an airplane into. We've even got the coordinates on that one. The pyramids, as I mentioned, almost the same proportions as the Great Pyramids in Giza, which would make pyramid complex on every continent of this country. And then according to Corey Good, who I was on a UFO panel with at Contact in the Desert last June, he said that there, and he's been to it, archaeological digs where they're actually finding antediluvian megalithic structures. I mean, massive stone structures, cyclopean architecture that you would find at the Osirian in Egypt or Baalbek in Lebanon. I mean, just the scale and massive size of these things are mind-boggling. And the fact that they're a mile below the ice and they're digging them out and pulling out pre-ice age creatures like giant mastodons and mammoths, and even very tall, giant-like figures.
There you
10,
go.
12 foot tall, pre-Adamites. I mean, the mysteries abound. So I'm just going to go down there with an open mind and just try to get some interviews, talk to people. I might not get past the penguins and the icebergs, but I'm going to try.
You're going to be
With any luck, this will be the year of disclosure.
You're going to be carrying on the good work of Admiral Byrd.
Yeah, Nanook of the South, perhaps.
Well, do you think? I mean, is that what Admiral Byrd encountered? This giant craft, this giant base during Operation High Jump, when he went down there, and supposedly, the U.S. forces were forced back by this advanced, aerial craft the Germans had, perhaps, in conjunction with the ETs.
And of course, this is after World War II, when Germany surrendered, not the Third Reich, it should be pointed out, and perhaps skirted away all their high-tech toys down here to Antarctica. What safer place than this Shangri-La, as described by Admiral Dönitz, that would be the perfect hideout for the Fuhrer? And it is possible that Hitler did not die in the bunker, but made an escape down to the Southlands, and some say lived out the rest of his life in San Carlos de Berluce, another location we're going to check out on the South America tour. But to your point about Admiral Byrd, yes, he mounted a large expedition 1946, 1947 that was meant to be 6 months. After 2 months, they were confronted by some kind of enemy that Richard Byrd said in an interview coming back through South America had the capacity to fly from pole to pole in a day, and saying that this is a kind of adversary we might want to try to negotiate with rather than fight. And he called off his expedition after 2 months. Now, what's really interesting is when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a period of time where with a suitcase of money, you could have gone to Moscow and found a former KGB worker that would empty file cabinets for anything you were interested in. And in the early 1990s, you had alien autopsy videos coming out of the KGB offices, videos even, crash disk videos, all kinds of information that came out then, including their intel on what happened to Admiral Byrd. And according to this documentary, based on information that came out in the early 1990s, that Admiral Byrd not only lost all of his aircraft to some superior force, but also a ship called the USS Murdoch was sunk to send them a message: you don't want to mess with us. And indeed, Admiral Byrd hightailed it right back and didn't mess with them. And ever since then, this whole mystery and lore of the Nazis having their most high-tech flying craft out of the Skoda works of Czech Republic that came down in some of the larger U-boats, which are just basically as big as any container ship, container box. If they could break it down and then reassemble it in South America, they would have that technology still. Then there was also the case of the U.S. exploding a nuke over this area of New Schwabenland in the early 1950s. And what that was about, as well as Admiral Byrd's expedition, is still classified information and has not been released to the public in full. So, Richard, it is just mystery on top of mystery down in Antarctica. And hope to just get to the bottom. Well, it'd be nice to get a couple of these, but certainly to go out and see this craft that's melting under the ice that cannot be pulled out. I mean, it's so massive. Usually if it's a smaller scout craft, the U.S. has a team even anywhere in the world that can go and collect these things within a couple hours. But this one is so big that now that the ice is melting, and there is also volcanoes that are erupting along the trans-Antarctic mountain range. Dr. Michael Sala at Contacting the Desert said there are 5 volcanoes in Antarctica that are going off. So the ice is melting, and they can't hide this any longer, much longer, because other people from other countries are going down there and seeing it. People have drones now that they can fly and even film it from 100 miles away. I've known about it for about 10 years. Somebody was leaking me images when I was working on my book, Future Esoteric, and knew about it since then. Still trying to get the exact GPS coordinates, but there are forward bases for people like these royal families or these Illuminati members that have enough money and pay for the clearance to go see them.
Well, is this this may be then what ultimately pushes the disclosure, which pushes disclosure over the edge? Is this craft revealing itself?
I believe that's correct. We could have disclosure coming right out of Antarctica that would force the issue in so many other areas of disclosure. I mean, think about it, Richard. This would rewrite history as we know it, not only history of our planet and Earth and where this thing is, and supposedly it's 25,000 years old, but it would also open the door up to ET visitation of this planet as well. I mean, if Corey Good's right and they're pulling out 10 and 12-foot pre-Adamite giants who clearly are not human-like, but being that tall with a funky body, kind of like the way Akhenaten and Nefertiti are portrayed in Egyptian art, as giants, by the way, with these funky bodies and these elongated heads, kind of like the Paracas, Peru elongated heads. It's a game changer, Richard. And of course, as we know, there are powers that do not want disclosure coming out too fast. It's like drip, 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 little bits at a little time. So that probably is our biggest impediment to seeing these places, is if they're going to let us even go in there. And another one of my sources who's helping me with the clearance issue says as well, it's really up to the CIA. If they don't want you in there, they're not going to let you go.
Right.
But here's the thing. Right now, the CIA is going through this big purge under Trump. There's a lot going on in the letter agencies right now here in America. And who knows, maybe we get lucky and this is the year they finally say, okay, let them go. It's going to come out anyways.
Well, he is surprising a lot of people. I mean, he is the great disruptor, and people can say what they want about him, and obviously his some of his inappropriate tweets and so forth. But I wouldn't discount President Trump entirely being the disclosure president. I mean, I've been told that he is secretly contemplating another 9/11 investigation. And he's also talked about a congressional hearing on the efficacy of vaccines. So who knows? Maybe he's the president that will actually investigate disclosure.
I have no real skin in the game regarding Trump, and I've often said publicly, I think he'll go down in history as the worst president if he gets mired in all these scandals and doesn't get anything done, or he has the potential to be the best president if he can really root out the deep state and be the disclosure president. And as he said, come clean with vaccines and so many other things that have been perpetuated on the American people and really the world at large. America leads the way in so many ways that maybe he is the one that pushes the envelope far enough, and this is the time when it all comes out. And he is so belabored right now with all the other scandals going down with the Mueller investigation and his attorney Cohen. Maybe a good disclosure is what he needs to revise his presidency, Richard, and he'll give us the clearance.
Well, maybe
Come
that's
all the way down from the White House.
Maybe that's why he is so besieged. It's because he is so reckless, and I mean in a good way, and so disruptive and not playing by the rules, that he is threatening to, just turn over everything. You mentioned the Paracas skulls, and you mentioned you're going to South America, and you are going to Peru. Are you going to try and see the Paracas skulls?
Oh, you bet. And I'm one of the guest speakers on the Nassim Haramein 2.5-week tour of Peru and Bolivia. So I'm going to be going along with that tour. And my friend Brian Forrester, who lives in Paracas, is going to not only take us to the museum to see the elongated skulls, but he told me at Contact in the Desert, he'll take us out to the graveyard where they found them. So we'll have the context, the sacred place, if you will, that was viewed by these elongated skulls, which again are very human-like, but they're not human. When you have that much more cranial capacity, you can't use the boards and the wrapping method to shape the skull and gain a larger skull. You can move it around, as we know in Nat Geo. We've seen those pictures of the wrapped heads and reshaping the skull, but you always have the same cranial capacity. The brain size stays the same. But if you look at these elongated skulls, I mean, they just extend out like another 1/3 of the size of a normal human skull. And I have a lecture that I give in 2018 about these non-human, human-like, but not human entities that once lived on Earth, giants as well as dwarves, like the on the island of Flores. Just 2.5 years ago, Nature magazine came out and said, well, there's this little dwarf that was only 3 feet tall called the Flores man that is not human. So they'll admit to that, but they're still a little hesitant on the giants or the elongated skulls. Although they did come out and acknowledge the Boskop skull of South Africa, which again were 30% larger craniums than an average human. So something's going on here, Richard. There is pretty good evidence that there were non-human but human-like entities that once walked this earth, some of them very, very tall.
The Cherokee Little People.
There you go. Yeah, the Menehune of Hawaii. You hear the legends everywhere about the big and the tall.
Well, because it presents a problem to evolution as well, because we're supposed to start out smaller and get larger, not the other way around. So that kind of throws a monkey wrench into sort of the evolution narrative. Don't you think that's part of the problem?
Oh, it sure does. It really, just like this UFO craft down in South America, it's a total game changer. When established archaeology admits to this, it changes everything. And then it throws the whole Darwinian slow evolution, slow changes really into a tizzy. Because either we're talking about extraterrestrials living on this planet, or we're talking about evolution in a different kind of way altogether. That maybe there were some branches on the tree, if they were all from this planet, that grew off like Neanderthal, lived and perished long ago, distant time. And as I say in my Giants talk, I always start out by saying, just consider that the Earth has been a habitable planet for millions of years. If we were to have a time machine and we went back to the age of the dinosaurs, we could still breathe the oxygen. We could still forage and find food for ourselves. So it is within the realm a possibility that these human-like entities once existed. And science, once again, it's like a drip, 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 slowly starting to come around to the notion that these other non-human-like entities once lived on this planet.
How many of those skeletal remains are sitting in a warehouse that were shipped to the Smithsonian, intended for public display? And it's like that scene, was it Indiana Jones? Is it the fourth one where he goes to that warehouse? And of course, all of these, the Ark of the Covenant is in there and all of these artifacts. I mean, is that where all of these skeletal remains? There were hundreds of giant skeletons sent to the Smithsonian.
Oh, there were.
I mean, there's a paper trail, and yet they just mysteriously disappeared.
And newspaper article headlines, which I have in my talk, hundreds and hundreds of newspaper headlines. It was the very first Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, at the end when the Ark goes into a massive Smithsonian warehouse. But what's even worse is reports of them just dumping these bones into the sea. Just get rid of them. All the out-of-place artifacts or UPAs, just drop them. Get them out of sight, out of mind. And that is the cardinal sin of archaeology. Even if you can't make sense of your dig, you do not destroy evidence. And many, many of these stories of the Smithsonian just swooping in on a dig where they're pulling out giants, even right where I grew up in northwestern suburbs of Chicago. We used to take our vacations in Wisconsin every summer, just over the border, less than 100 miles from where I grew up, Lake Delavan, one of the most famous digs about 100 years ago by archaeologists from Beloit College, finding these giants. It was in the newspapers. People were coming out to see them. Then all of a sudden the Smithsonian comes in and like flips their badge like an FBI agent, say, oh, we're your superiors, we'll take over here. And then they just take all the remains. So these archaeologists are, hey, we worked all summer on this. What happened with it? How come there's not a big display in the Smithsonian? Total silence. Total roadblock. Well, we don't know what you're talking about, sir. We didn't have anything come to our museum. There's no record of that whatsoever. So this has been going on for about 200 years in this country, where they will just get rid of the remains and deny they ever took them. And that, again, is a cardinal sin in archaeology.
It's sometimes I'm left to think that everything we think we know about our past is just total bunk. It's all made up.
Well, Voltaire said, history is the Mississippi of lies. I think he's pretty right. That or they say in warfare, history is written by the victors. Those who win get to give their version of history, and that gets talked about as what really happened, but not always what really happened.
Are you still doing your radio show, Brad?
I am, but I'm putting it on hold when I go travel. So Halloween is the last day I'll do the Esoteric Circle on Revolution Radio and Late Night in the Midlands. And then it's travel time for Emily and I, and really looking forward to this. We're getting our international driver's license and starting to plot out our routes and meet up with Nassim on the early side and his tour group in Peru and Bolivia. And that's going to be fascinating. They go to a different sacred site every day. And I'll get to be a guest speaker and go along and talk to all the historian and other guides, and we'll get some great footage of this, and really looking forward to setting this up. So even though I do have my third book in the Esoteric series, it started out with Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses, and Future Esoteric, The Unseen Realms, I'm working on the third book, which I need to get some Antarctica and Nazi information. So I'll complete that when I get back in 2019. So it's looking like Beyond Esoteric, The Ultimate Journey will come out in 2020. And we'll have to have a talk about that one.
Absolutely, Brad. Much to talk about. Fingers crossed that you're going to make it down to the Antarctic, and I would love to do that show with you live if it works out. Good luck on that score. And in the meantime, bradolsen.com, cccpublishing.com, is that still a valid URL?
Yeah, that's right. And people can still get the physical books off of there. But when I go traveling, since I'm the main person who does the fulfillment, including the books of Leo Lion-Zagami and several other authors at CCC Publishing, it'll be ebook only for a couple months. But until Halloween, we'll still be able to ship off books from cccpublishing.com, including my own.
Terrific stuff, Brad. Always a delight. Thank you so much, and good luck with that trip.
Yeah, we'll be in touch, Richard. Thanks for having me on today. It was great talking to you again.
My pleasure. All the best. Okay, before I dim the lights in my little studio beneath the stairs, I'm going to tell you what's coming up next on Conspiracy Unlimited.
They were calling it Helter Skelter.
The history of rock and roll is littered with suspicious deaths and the unexplainable.
The Beatles telling him that there was going to be this race war.
Lennon, Hendrix, Presley, Jim Morrison, the truth told by the experts and the people there. Revelations that will blow your mind. The Rock and Roll Twilight Zone with Richard Serrett. Listen and subscribe at Apple Podcast and Google Play.
Next time on Conspiracy Unlimited, paranormal researcher and executive editor of Fate magazine, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, discusses mysteries of the afterlife. Until then, I'm Richard Serrett. So long for now.
A new Conspiracy Unlimited with Richard Serrett drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at conspiracyunlimitedpodcast.com. Blow your mind. That is all for now. Oh, and remember to share and give a 5-star review because we have huge egos and need love. We're like cats. We need constant petting.